In today's video, we're going to look at an example of the Levee Effect, which is a very common phenomena documented within the field of socio-hydrology that we'll look at conceptually today to help you understand a little bit better what a coupled human water system is and how you may have been part of one. Have you ever shopped for where to live, where to buy a house or get an apartment? If so, you may have been involved within a coupled human water system playing out across time. Picture two hypothetical neighborhoods that are side by side. Each neighborhood has its own watershed, and a watershed describes the area of land where the rain falls, and all of the rain that falls within that watershed boundary would theoretically drain to a common point. So pretend we have these two neighborhoods that are delineated by two different watersheds. Watershed High Top and Watershed Low Tide. Watershed High Top is very elevated. It's up super high, it has good drainage, and it's had this good drainage for a really long time. And as a result, it's where all the well-to-do people tend to live. And they have really nice McMansions there and real mansions, and they all want to live here because they know it's never going to flood and they get to be super close to downtown and all the jobs. Everyone else that works downtown, they have to live way out in the middle of nowhere and drive really, really far. Their commute is horrendous. Next to Watershed High Top is another area called Watershed Low Tide. Watershed Low Tide is very close in space to Watershed High Top and to downtown, but for the longest time, no one ever really wanted to live in Watershed Low Tide because it's always flooded. It's really flat here, really swampy, and pretty much all that used to be here were some alligators and some turtles. Until at one point in time, some developers looked at it and had a great idea. And they said, okay, Watershed Low Tide, we're gonna revitalize you. We're gonna fix you and make you livable for human society. And so they went to work. They studied where the water naturally wanted to drain, and they figured out exactly how to design these big levee systems and these big dams and reservoirs that would hold back all the water so Watershed Low Tide could be just as dry and desirable as Watershed High Top. And they eventually got the job done. And soon after, houses started popping up. And at first, all the people that had to shop for houses were like, I don't trust that Watershed Low Tide. My grandma and grandpa used to say that it flooded here all the time and this is never going to be anything but a swamp, and I believed them. But after a few years, more and more people started to forget that Watershed Low Tide used to flood. They just saw these beautiful houses and dry neighborhoods, and they realized, these houses and these apartments are a lot cheaper than Watershed High Top. And look, I'll be so close to downtown. What have I got to lose? So they went in with the real estate agents and they started shopping. And they were pleasantly surprised to find out that, wow, flood insurance isn't even required here because look at that. The developers held back all the rivers that could have flooded. There aren't even any rivers anymore. This is a win-win. The houses are cheaper. We have the same access to downtown. We don't need to pay flood insurance. I mean, there's these weird ponds over here, which are actually the reservoirs and dams. It just looked to them like a nice dog park, a nice place to go hiking on the weekend. So over time, more and more people got the same sentiment that Watershed Low Tide is the new place to be. And eventually, people were living on top of each other. There were apartments and parking lots and restaurants galore. And the thought of potentially flooding in this area was completely ludicrous, especially after several generations had passed. As you see, by this point, the dams and levees had started to get pretty old, but there was now like 100,000 people living there. There was concrete everywhere, and all everyone knew that was currently alive was that it never flooded here and land was more affordable. But these old levees, they start to creak and they start to yawn, and some storms come that test them. They don't totally blow them out of the water, pun intended, but it's not looking good for this infrastructure. And so some politicians said, hey, everyone, I think maybe we should invest some money over here and maybe we should have a storm bond or a new tax. We need to raise some money to maintain this massive infrastructure. You know, it's going to be a little expensive, but it's worth it. But those politicians get laughed out of town. Everyone in Watershed Low Tide is like, what are you, crazy? I'm not spending money on something that will never happen. I want to keep my money and forget this little maintenance project you're talking about. There's nothing wrong with these levees. They seem perfectly fine to me. So in essence, the political will is not there anymore. The infrastructure does not get repaired like it should. And the people, they don't seem to have a personal connection to this flood infrastructure. Out of sight, out of mind. Eventually, a pretty big storm does come to town, and the water behind these levees gets stronger and stronger and pushes, and the levees creak more and they yawn more, and suddenly, kaboom, they fail. And they flood 10,000 residents in Watershed Low Tide. Out of nowhere, just the water starts rising and people are just so confused and astounded, and a lot of what they owned is suddenly destroyed. And these same people, none of them have flood insurance to rebuild or replace their things. They didn't buy it because it was voluntary, because there was no river, there was no 100-year flood that they were living in. So they're completely shocked and befuddled, and they say, how in the world could this happen to us? No one ever told us that we might flood here in Watershed Low Tide. This is crazy. And they start looking for someone to blame, and they point fingers and become disgruntled. And thousands of people now have to face the challenge of starting over their entire lives. You see, in Watershed Low Tide, there is no longer just alligators and turtles living in the flood zone. There are now humans, and all these humans have their own perceptions and memories and political beliefs and behaviors, all revolving around their connection to flood risk. But this connection to flood risk has been altered because they're no longer connected to a natural floodplain that constantly ebbs and flows, and they maybe learn over time to respect it from a safe distance. No, they're intertwined with this human-designed solution that was definitely built with the best of intentions and did allow 100,000 people to now live closer to downtown. But over time, that beautiful solution didn't just change where the water went, it changed how people perceived their own risk to flooding, their own connection to the water cycle. So this community that was now much closer to downtown with more affordable housing, they were also much more embedded within a complex water system than any of them realized. And over time, the human components like flood memory and trust and risk perception, they changed because people were no longer connected to that water, and so they had different feelings about it. Since they're physically separated from water for so long, several generations, their flood memory started to dissolve and decay and become smaller until it was almost zero. Nobody talked about flooding anymore. And then they became psychologically separated from it. They stopped seeing and feeling the risk. And so in turn, they stopped planning for it, they stopped prioritizing it, and they stopped pricing around it. So when the system did eventually break, the unintended consequences were so huge precisely because no one had accounted for these complex two-way feedbacks between the water cycle changing and society changing and them interconnecting and co-evolving over time. And each of these grew and shifted shape over many decades. And that's an example of what the Levee effect looks like. Definitely click like and subscribe, because if you stick around, we're going to be looking at some more real world, modern, current examples of coupled human water systems. Thanks so much.